Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining myself, Stuart Coleman, Business Development and Learning Director, and Olivier Theroux, Head of Research and Development at the Open Data Institute. We're delighted to have this slot with you. We very much hope we're going to keep to no more than 15 minutes to make this content something that is useful and easy to consume. So thank you. I'm just going to share some content. And data ethics. We were asked to give a short introduction on our perspective in data ethics. And as mentioned, joined today by Olivier Theroux, our Head of Research and Development. Olivier has been leading the Open Data Institute's research and development for 4 years and was formerly in a leadership role at the BBC, also in R&D. Olivier's got a unique global perspective, having worked in Asia Pacific and lived in Japan for a number of years, in Canada, North America, and also in Europe, really always focused at the intersection of technology and society for over 20 years. And he will shortly be telling us a little bit more about his perspectives on data ethics. So just a quick intro to the Open Data Institute for a few minutes. So who are we and what are we about? Well, we are a not-for-profit organization. We were founded in 2012. I'll talk a little bit more in a second about our founders and kind of the journey we've been on. But in short, our goal is to make data work for everyone. We want a world where data works better for everyone. And the way we go about making that happen is to work with governments, companies, and other organizations, including people like data protection authorities, to try and put in place the conditions that build a more open and a more trusted data ecosystem for everyone. That's quite a big challenge. We work in lots of different areas and sectors. We can expand on some of those during this content. Many of you will be familiar with and know of Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Some of you may also know of Sir Nigel Shadbolt, and hopefully some of you are also aware of Jenny Tennyson and Louise Burke. These are our kind of key leaders in the organization. Tim and Nigel co-founded the Institute in 2012, originally with a strong focus on government open data. The UK was at the time leading many of international countries in its charge to open up government data. But increasingly in the years since, we've built a kind of book of work and initiatives around what we call the data spectrum, which you can find on our website, which shows the value of data from both completely open, publicly, freely available data right through to closed data. But we particularly focus on open and shared data. And we now have a number of programs and initiatives that have focused on shared data too. We are based in London, but we have team members across the globe, and we also have associates we work with in different jurisdictions too. So just a quick bit on our perspective on how organizations can get value from data. And really, we've developed over the years we've been operating a strong view that data needs to be looked after responsibly. We talk about stewardship of data, and we see 3 key areas of value that come from appropriately looking after data: positive impact. So insights that help people decide and make better decisions, and the tools that people and organizations need to use to create those insights. But at the foundational level, making sure people work responsibly with the data, whether that's data they might be collecting, reusing, passing to, or sharing on behalf of others. We think it's critical that people do not consider data as oil. I think it was originally an EU commissioner a number of years ago that talked about data as oil. And in some respects, that was a useful early analogy because it gave people the perspective that this is a valuable resource. But in actual fact, if you think about data, it's firstly generated from human activity. And secondly, it is not finite. So in many respects, it's completely different from oil. And actually, if you think about it from the human perspective, it's our responsibility. We collectively create and are responsible for the generation of data, and we all know it's growing at a phenomenal rate. But actually, if people think of it as oil, it can create a tendency to hoard the data. And we have seen mentalities, certainly in early business models, and arguably some of the tech platform business models are perhaps potentially a little bit susceptible to this, is thinking that kind of wrapping your arms around the data is and not kind of permitting or provisioning access to other people and can create a dystopia around the data. So we tried to dispel that theory. Similarly, on the other side of this spectrum is fear. People who maybe are concerned about not collecting the data because they have concerns about things like trust and equity and engagement. And we're obviously going to talk about ethics today as an area. We're going to expand upon this. People withdraw their consent. I mean, we've obviously had a pandemic over the last year, and actually it hugely has highlighted how important data is, both to society, but to individuals, whether that's informing you about where you can and can't go, whether that's showing you what the state of the pandemic might be in your local vicinity, if you live in a city, for example. We've all become accepting of data as normal, as being a kind of critical part of our infrastructure. And in fact, infrastructure is something we like people to think about as data infrastructure rather than oil. Is think about data as infrastructure. But a lack of trust can mean data fearing. So what ultimately the ODI is focused on is trying to find an equilibrium between these two poles. So we want a good balance. We can never predict all the consequences. We can help you with tools and capabilities, as we're going to talk about a bit more today. But essentially what we want is people to be constantly monitoring what the status quo is and trying to nudge back behaviors into this kind of balanced position between being open, but also not fearing and closing off and not collecting and bringing data together for everyone to work with. So in short order, that is our perspective of how the data ecosystem needs to evolve. And we want to get obviously more and more organizations to share this perspective. We've worked with organizations to take this model and adapt it to their culture and environment, whether that's big commercial organizations like the WPP Group, whether that's government organizations. We would welcome doing that in Guernsey, of course. So I'm just going to hand over to Olivier now to talk about data trust and ethics in a bit more detail. Olivier, please tell me which slides to go to.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you for this introduction. And I wanted to talk today about the work that we've done in our R&D program over the past few years, really looking at the evidence of where we sit on that trust issue. Insofar as Stuart just said, in order to have a healthy data ecosystem, we do need trust. Otherwise, we get into that dystopia of data fearing. And so some of the evidence that we've been gathering over the past few years is whether indeed trust is important. And we got plenty of evidence of that. But what we also got plenty of evidence of is that trust levels are very low. This on the screen here is from a series of surveys we have conducted with YouGov in 2018 and 19. And we see in a number of countries in Europe, single-digit levels of trust in whether the general population believes that organizations, certain types of organizations, can be trusted with data about them. If we've got such low levels of trust, that means that the potential for data to be used to really tackle the biggest challenge of society, or indeed to create innovation, to unlock value, are really at risk. I'm going to go to the next slide now. And of course, when we think about the lack of trust, we tend to think about the big scandals. Cambridge Analytica is kind of the poster child of the scandals about misuse of data in data flows and data sharing. But in reality, the bread and butter, so to speak, of the issues of trust are not so much those big scandals. It is overall the practice of data access, data collection, and data use, which is sometimes lacking in the right mechanisms to build trust with other partners in industry or with the general population. An example I'm going to use is one that may be that you may know, which is Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go, if you don't know it, is an alternate reality game, something you download on your phone, and you go and you interact with points of interest in the real world, in the geography of our cities and towns and so on and so forth. What you may not know is that the points of interest of Pokemon Go were actually built on a previous game by the same company called Niantic. And that game was, and you can see it on the next screen, a game called Ingress, which was similarly a game where people would interact with the real world, and there's some elements of conquest and fighting blue versus green, but it had a very specific demographic. The people playing the game, as was shown by some studies, were largely middle class, and in most geographies were tended to be male and white. And so here, for instance, in New York, what ended up happening is that the points of interest were generated by the players of that previous game called Ingress. And so when the points of interest were reused in Pokemon Go, as you can see on the next screen, there was a massive discrepancy in the numbers of points of interest in neighborhoods that were largely middle class, largely white, versus neighborhoods that were not. Here, for instance, for illustration, is a map of New York, and you can see that Manhattan is overwhelmingly represented, whereas others were not. And there's been a number of studies looking at that, and you can see on the next screen is a quote from one of those studies, quoted in the Miami Herald in 2016, that the Ingress players did skew male, young, and English speaking, which had a big impact on the points of interest available in Pokemon Go. Now, of course, the fact that points of interest in an online game are more available in some neighborhoods, and that there is in that a bias in the collection of data with regards to social demographic context is not the end of the world. There's no death involved. There's no massive harm involved. But this is, for me, one of the illustrations of something that does feel harmful, but does create down the line a discrimination. The bias in how the data was collected and generated in Ingress meant that the global player base of Pokemon Go was suffering from a form of discrimination. And that is why we need to think about how we collect, share, and use data, and whether things like bias can be integrated into the data that we're using, because down the line it means that our users, or the people who are supposed to benefit from the data and the applications of the data, are going to be for instance, in this case, discriminated against. If you go to the next slide, that is at the heart of what we call data ethics, which is a branch of ethics that really looks at data practices with the potential to adversely impact on people and society. And what I would like to stress here is that data ethics applies to the whole spectrum of harm, from the relatively benign discrimination that we've seen in Pokemon Go, all the way to really harmful risks when data is not being collected, used, or shared ethically. We're not building on nothing. We're actually building on the work that has been done for many years on ethical principles. There's many of them. Here is a study that has been done by a team at Harvard, looking at a cataloging and mapping of AI principles. But what we found in our research was that while there was a lot of AI principles and data ethics principles, the practice was where there was a dearth of tools. And therefore, over the past 4 years, we have been developing something we call the Data Ethics Canvas, which is a tool that really looks at 4 big groups of concerns. The data: where does it come from? Where, who who is involved in it, whether there are specific rights assigned to it, the impact, who is going to be impacted positively and negatively whenever using, sharing, or collecting this data, and then engagement and process, because it is really important to not just go and say, oh, well, we've looked at impact and overall we think that the positive impact outweighs the negative. There is a dynamic system in really understanding how you can engage with the people who are affected positively and negatively, so that the risks can be mitigated and so that the positive outcomes can be maximized. And the process, those things are dynamic, and a lot of the scandals we see are not so much when someone does something wrong, but when things change and people don't have the process to act on that. And the end result, looking at those four groups as a practice, is what we call the data ethics canvas, which is shown here on screen in its various iterations. The last iteration looks like this on the screen if you go to the next slide. And it's a tool that is free to download on the ODI's website and has been so far downloaded for use by organizations in more than 50 countries. But what's really important now that you've got a tool like this and a set of principles that can be adopted is to make sure that organizations have the right skills and the right processes in place to really benefit from a tool like the ethics canvas, and to really have a good way to understand the implications of how they work with data, and have the right processes and engagement in place to make sure that they work ethically with data. And I'm going to hand over back to you, Stuart, to talk about the work that we've been developing on top of this new tool, so that organizations can behave more ethically with data.
Thanks, Olivier. So I'd just like to give a quick snapshot to how we've built on the 4 years of research and development and the work that Olivier's team have done in developing the data ethics canvas. We've worked with a number of organizations to apply the canvas, both partnering with them to look at data sets they maybe already have in use, that they're considering using. And on the back of that, we've also now reached a level of confidence where we've developed a learning program to train and support and certify people to use the data ethics canvas. Before I talk about that, I just wanted to talk about, for 1 minute, ODI's perspective on learning. Many people assume that when we talk about data, we're talking about data skills, technical skills, and also developed in the research and development program has been the data skills framework in close cooperation with the learning team. And what we're trying to do here is highlight that actually helping organizations build data capability involves developing skills across a range of areas. Some of these are completely non-technical. We're already talking today about working more ethically and responsibly with data, but it also means about designing services for use and governing access to data, which by themselves are actually not technical disciplines. Of course, a lot of people immediately think about analytics, statistical work, or trends, or AI, making the data you've got intelligible or intelligent is of course necessary if you're going to start applying things like machine learning. And of course, many organizations also think about the huge work involved in cleaning data, getting it ready and linking it. But it's very important to consider these other areas too. So when it comes to the data ethics canvas, what we've done is assemble a program. We are training a couple of partners already in private pilot cohorts, so we can get strong closed loop feedback. We shall be launching a public version of this course in June 2021. So this is being recorded in May. So at some point next month, we will have a date for a public course. You can register your interest at the URL here. We shall ensure this information is available to the hosts of Bijou. But in short summary, the Data Ethics Professionals Learning Program is a 40-hour syllabus designed to get people to a consistent level of competency using the Data Ethics Canvas. As Olivier mentioned, we've seen hundreds of thousands of people using the Canvas from different jurisdictions. We've translated it in some of those jurisdictions. But what we want to do is try and build a shared, kind of commonly accepted approach to best practices around using the Canvas. And we also want to validate that people are using it in the way we hope they are using it. So this learning syllabus can be delivered remotely. There is a formal assessment at the end after the third module, which will assess how people are using the Canvas, will enable them to bring their own data set to the learning. And we anticipate a 60% kind of pass mark for this assessed program. So this is for us an exciting new step. We would love to have people from Bijou's community involved. And we hope this has been an informative, useful session. Thank you very much for your time. I think we are bang on 20 minutes, which is what we hoped we would be at. You can contact myself, Stuart at theodi.org, or Olivier, ot@theodi.org. And of course, you can find us on the Twitter handle there. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.